Queen Zarathul stood on the crystalline balcony of her palace, watching the twin suns of Vextheri cast purple shadows across her domain. Her 6 arms moved gracefully as she adjusted the ceremonial robes that marked her as ruler of the most powerful empire in this sector of the galaxy. The Zephyrian race had conquered 17 star systems, their advanced technology and natural telepathic abilities making them nearly unstoppable in both diplomacy and warfare. Today marked the 3rd anniversary of her marriage to Marcus Chun, a human from the backwater planet Earth. The union had shocked the galactic community. Why would the feared Zephyrian queen marry a member of such a primitive species? Humans had barely achieved faster-than-light travel and possessed no natural psychic abilities. They were considered little more than curious pets by most advanced civilizations. Zara remembered the day she first met Marcus at the Intergalactic Trade Summit on Nexus Prime. While other ambassadors presented elaborate gifts and made grand speeches, Marcus had simply offered her a small potted plant from Earth called a sunflower. "It always turns toward the light," he had said with a gentle smile. "I thought you might appreciate something that knows how to find hope." The gesture had been so unexpected, so genuine, that it had pierced through centuries of diplomatic facades. In a galaxy full of beings who wanted something from her, here was someone who seemed to want nothing but to share a moment of beauty. Their courtship had been brief, but intense, conducted through encrypted communications across the void of space. Marcus had insisted on a small, private ceremony. No grand spectacle, no political maneuvering, just a simple exchange of vows in the palace garden. Even now, many of her advisors questioned the wisdom of the match. Chief Minister Kethval had made his disapproval clear from the beginning. "Your Majesty," Kethval's mental voice echoed in her mind as he approached the balcony. "The council grows restless. There are rumors that the Andromedans are testing our borders again. They see your human husband as a sign of weakness." Zara's 4 eyes narrowed. The Andromedans were an old enemy, a race of silicon-based warriors who respected only strength. They had been quiet for the past 5 years, but intelligence reports suggested they were building their forces again. "Let them think what they wish," she replied, both aloud and telepathically. "Marcus is my choice, and that should be enough. But, Majesty, he contributes nothing to our military might. He holds no significant position in our government. He spends his days in that laboratory of his, playing with primitive human technologies that are centuries behind our own. The nobles whisper that you've grown soft, that love has clouded your judgment." Before Zara could respond, the soft sound of footsteps interrupted them. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his brown hair slightly disheveled from whatever project had occupied him that morning. At just over 6 feet tall, he was considered small by Zephyrian standards, and his single pair of arms and 2 eyes made him appear almost childlike to her people. "Am I interrupting something important?" he asked, his voice carrying that warm tone that never failed to calm her. Kethval's mental presence radiated disdain. "We were discussing matters of state, human. Perhaps you should return to your toys." Marcus's expression didn't change, but Zara felt a subtle shift in his posture. 3 years of marriage had taught her to read the micro-expressions that played across his features. There was something different today, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. "Actually," Marcus said, pulling a small device from his pocket, "I've been working on something that might interest the council. A little side project inspired by some old Earth theories." The device was no larger than his palm, made for what appeared to be ordinary materials. Kethval's mental scoff was almost audible. "More primitive human engineering, I assume." Marcus smiled, but there was something sharp behind his eyes now. "You know what I love about humans, Kethval? We're incredibly good at taking things apart and putting them back together in ways nobody expects." He held up the device, and Zara noticed her husband's hands were completely steady. No tremor of nervousness, no hesitation. "This little gadget? It's based on something called quantum entanglement. Pretty basic concept, really. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. Human science is millennia behind ours," Kethval said aloud, abandoning mental communication in his condescension. "Your species has barely grasped the fundamentals of faster-than-light travel." "You're absolutely right," Marcus agreed cheerfully. "We're way behind. That's exactly why this works." Without warning, he activated the device. The air around them shimmered, and suddenly Every piece of Zephyrian technology on the palace balcony went completely dead. The force field that protected them from the alien atmosphere flickered out. Communication devices went silent. Even Kethval's cybernetic implants sparked and failed. Zara's 4 eyes widened in shock. "Marcus, what did you just do?" Her husband's smile grew wider, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something that made her understand why humans had survived and thrived on a planet full of predators despite having no natural weapons or psychic abilities. "I built an EMP device that specifically targets crystalline matrix technology," he said casually. "Turns out, when you've spent 3 years studying Zephyrian engineering from the inside, you learn some interesting things about frequency harmonics and resonance patterns." The silence that followed was profound. Kethval stood frozen, his telepathic abilities completely cut off by the failure of his neural enhancers. Around the palace, Zara could hear the distant sounds of confusion as automated systems failed throughout the complex. "The effect is temporary," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a tone she'd never heard before. "About 30 minutes for a full reset. But the beauty of human engineering is that we're used to working with limited resources. This little device cost me maybe 50 credits to build, and it just shut down technology that represents thousands of years of advancement." Zara felt a chill run down her spine, but it wasn't fear. It was recognition. Her husband wasn't showing off or making threats. He was revealing a truth that she was only now beginning to understand. "The thing is," Marcus said, looking directly at Kethval, "humans didn't get to where we are by having the best technology or the strongest telepathic abilities. We got there by being adaptable, creative, and absolutely ruthless when we need to be. We're the species that looked at a planet full of things trying to kill us and decided to domesticate some of them, eat others, and turn the rest into tools." The devices around them began to flicker back to life as the EMP effect wore off. Kethval's implants rebooted with small sparks of light, and his mental presence returned, but it felt different now. Subdued. "I've spent the last 3 years being the perfect diplomatic husband," Marcus continued. "Learning your customs, staying out of politics, keeping my head down. But if the Andromedans or anyone else thinks that means I'm weak or that Zara is weak for marrying me, they're about to learn something very important about humans." He turned to his wife, and she saw love in his eyes, but also something else. Something that made her remember why her own species had conquered 17 star systems. "You asked me once why I wanted to marry you," he said softly. "It's because you're the most magnificent warrior I've ever met, and warriors deserve partners who can stand beside them in battle, not behind them in safety." As the last of the palace systems came back online, Zara realized that her modest human husband had just demonstrated something that would change everything. He hadn't just shown her his capabilities. He'd shown her that she had been seeing only the surface of what humans could be. The sunflower he'd given her 3 years ago still sat on her desk, genetically modified to thrive in Zephyrian soil. It had indeed taught her about hope, but now she was beginning to understand that it had also been teaching her about patience, adaptation, and the quiet strength that came from knowing exactly when to turn toward the light. In the distance, alert signals began sounding as palace security responded to the technological blackout. Soon there would be questions, investigations, and probably a very interesting conversation with the council. But for now, Zara simply looked at her husband with new eyes and began to smile. The Andromedans had no idea what was coming. The emergency session of the High Council convened within hours of the palace blackout. The great circular chamber buzzed with nervous energy as the most powerful beings in the Zephyrian Empire gathered to discuss what many saw as an act of technological terrorism in the heart of their government. Zara sat upon the obsidian throne, her ceremonial armor gleaming under the chamber's bioluminescent lighting. To her right stood Marcus, dressed in simple human clothing that looked almost primitive compared to the elaborate robes and technological augmentations worn by the council members. Several nobles had requested that he be excluded from the session, but Zara had made it clear that her husband would remain by her side. Admiral Vex Tun, commander of the Imperial Fleet, was the first to speak. "Your Majesty, the security implications of what occurred today cannot be understated. If this human can disable our technology so easily, what does that say about our defenses? What does it say about our judgment in allowing potential threats so close to the throne?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled nobles. General Thakmor, whose cybernetic body incorporated the finest military-grade enhancements, stepped forward. I have served this empire for 3 centuries. I have seen the rise and fall of dozens of species who thought they could challenge Zephyrian might. This display today feels like a prelude to something far worse. Marcus remained silent, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression calm and attentive. Zara noticed how he seemed to be cataloging every face, every reaction, storing information with the same methodical approach he brought to his research. Honored Council, Zara began, her mental voice carrying the authority of generations of rulers. You speak of threats and challenges. Tell me, in your centuries of service, how many of our enemies announced their capabilities before attacking? How many gave us advance warning of their intentions? Science Minister Velnara, her crystalline skin pulsing with thoughtful patterns, spoke up. Your Majesty raises an interesting point. The humans' demonstration was clearly controlled, temporary, and conducted in full view of our highest officials. This suggests either supreme confidence or what, Minister? Zara prompted. Or the action of someone who wants us to understand something, rather than someone planning an attack. Chief Minister Kethval, still visibly shaken from his earlier encounter, interjected. Understanding or not, the fact remains that primitive human technology just neutralized systems that cost us decades to develop. How is this possible? How do we not know? For the first time since the session began, Marcus spoke. May I address the council, Your Majesty? Zara nodded, curious to see how her husband would handle the combined scrutiny of the Empire's most powerful figures. Marcus stepped forward, and Zara was struck again by that subtle change in his demeanor. Gone was the quiet, unassuming researcher who preferred his laboratory to political gatherings. In his place stood someone who moved with purpose and spoke with authority. Honored members of the council, he began, you're asking the wrong questions. You want to know how I did it, but what you should be asking is why it was possible in the first place. The chamber fell silent. Admiral Vexstun's mental signature carried skeptical curiosity. Explain yourself, human. Your technology is magnificent, Marcus continued, centuries ahead of anything Earth has produced. But it has a fundamental weakness that comes from being so advanced. You've optimized for maximum efficiency, maximum power, maximum capability. What you haven't optimized for is resilience against unexpected attack vectors. He gestured toward General Thakmor's cybernetic enhancements. Your implants are masterworks of engineering, General. But they're also networked, standardized, and built on unified protocols that prioritize performance over security. That's not a flaw in your design philosophy. It's a natural consequence of being the dominant power in this region of space. Why would you need to defend against tactics you've never encountered? Science Minister Velnara's crystalline patterns shifted to indicate intense interest. You're suggesting that our technological superiority has created vulnerabilities? I'm saying that humans learned to fight differently because we had to, Marcus replied. On Earth, we spent millennia as prey animals. We survived by being unpredictable, by thinking outside established patterns, by finding ways to defeat opponents who were bigger, stronger, and better armed than we were. Marcus reached into his pocket and produced another small device, causing several council members to tense visibly. Relax, he said with a slight smile. This one's just a holographic projector. The device activated, filling the center of the chamber with a 3-dimensional map of the local star systems. Red markers indicated known Andromedan positions, while blue showed Zephyrian territory. For the past 3 years, I've been studying more than just your technology, Marcus said. I've been studying your enemies. The Andromedans are planning something big. Their force buildup isn't random. They're preparing for a coordinated assault on multiple fronts. Admiral Vexstun's mental voice carried a hint of impatience. Our intelligence services are well aware of Andromedan activities. We have contingency plans. Your contingency plans assume they'll fight like Zephyrians, Marcus countered. Same tactics, same approaches, just with different technology. But what if they've learned to think like humans? The holographic display shifted, showing projected attack patterns that differed dramatically from traditional Andromedan strategies. Instead of the direct, force-on-force engagements that characterized past conflicts, These patterns showed asymmetric approaches designed to exploit specific weaknesses in Zephyrian defensive doctrine. 3 months ago, an Andromedan diplomatic mission visited Earth, Marcus continued. They spent 2 weeks studying human military history. Not our technology, which is useless to them, but our tactics. They were particularly interested in something called guerrilla warfare and the concept of total war. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. General Thakmore's cybernetic systems hummed as he processed the implications. You're suggesting they're adapting human military philosophy? I'm suggesting they already have, Marcus said quietly. And if I'm right, your current defenses aren't just inadequate. They're designed to fail against the kind of attack they're planning. Queen Zara felt a cold certainty settling in her mind. Her husband wasn't just demonstrating his capabilities. He was preparing them for what was coming. Show them the rest, Marcus, she said. Marcus nodded and activated another function on his device. The holographic display now showed detailed schematics of Zephyrian military installations, with red highlights indicating critical vulnerabilities that matched the attack patterns he had projected. I've spent the last year developing countermeasures, he explained. Not just the EMP device, but a whole suite of defensive technologies designed specifically to neutralize the advantages that asymmetric tactics provide. The demonstration today wasn't a threat, it was proof of concept. Science Minister Velnara leaned forward, her patterns now cycling rapidly through colors that indicated intense excitement. You've created defenses against our own technology? I've created defenses against the tactics that will be used to turn your technology against you, Marcus corrected. But here's the thing about human innovation. We don't just build tools to solve the current problem. We build tools that can be adapted to solve problems we haven't even thought of yet. He looked around the chamber, meeting the gaze of each council member in turn. The Andromedans think they understand humans now because they've studied our history. But they've only learned about human warfare. They haven't learned about human creativity, human adaptability, or what happens when humans are given the resources of an advanced civilization to work with. Admiral Vexton's mental signature had shifted from skepticism to something approaching respect. What exactly are you proposing, human? Marcus's smile was sharp as a blade. I'm proposing we teach the Andromedans the same lesson that every predator on Earth eventually learned. Underestimating humans is a mistake you only get to make once. The chamber erupted in a flurry of mental communications as council members began to grasp the full scope of what they were being offered. Zara watched her husband field questions and objections with the same calm precision he brought to everything, and she realized that the modest man she had married had been preparing for this moment far longer than anyone had imagined. The war was coming whether they wanted it or not. But now, for the first time, she was beginning to believe they might actually be ready for it. 6 weeks after the council session, the first Andromedan attacks began exactly as Marcus had predicted. They struck not at military strongholds or strategic positions, but at the infrastructure networks that connected the Zephyrian Empire. Communication relays went dark across 3-star systems. Trade routes became death traps as merchant vessels fell victim to coordinated ambushes. Most concerning of all, several outlying colonies simply went silent, their distress signals cut off mid-transmission. Admiral Vexton stood in the war room of the flagship Eternal Dominion, staring at tactical displays that showed a conflict unlike anything in Zephyrian military doctrine. They're fighting like insects, he muttered, his mental signature radiating frustration. Swarm attacks, hit and run tactics, no central command structure we can identify and eliminate. Beside him, General Thakmore's cybernetic systems sparked with agitation. We've lost contact with 12 outposts in the last 72 hours. Every time we send reinforcements, we find empty installations with all personnel and equipment gone. No signs of struggle, no weapon discharge residue. It's as if they simply vanished. On the main view screen, Marcus monitored the tactical situation from his position aboard the command vessel. What had once been his modest laboratory had been transformed into a hybrid command center filled with both human ingenuity and Zephyrian technology. Banks of monitoring equipment tracked everything from quantum fluctuations to subspace distortions, while holographic displays showed his defensive network coming online across the Empire. They're not fighting like insects, Marcus said calmly. They're fighting like humans. Specifically, like humans who have studied our own tactics and decided to use them against a technologically superior opponent. Queen Zura, resplendent in her combat armor, moved between the various displays with fluid grace. Her four arms manipulated multiple control interfaces simultaneously, while her telepathic abilities coordinated with fleet commanders across the sector. How long before your countermeasures are fully deployed? Another 18 hours for the primary network, Marcus replied. But I'm more concerned about what they're really after. These attacks are too scattered, too unfocused. In human military terms, this feels like a reconnaissance in force. As if summoned by his words, alert sirens began blaring throughout the ship. A communications officer's mental voice cut through the ambient telepathic chatter. Majesty, we're receiving a priority signal from the Nexus Prime system. It's from the Andromedans. The main view screen shifted to show the face of Supreme Commander Krell, the silicon-based warrior who led the Andromedan forces. His crystalline features reflected the harsh lighting of his command center, and when he spoke, his voice carried the grinding sound of stone against metal. Queen Zarathul of the Zephyrians, he began without preamble. Your empire has grown soft under your rule. We have studied your weaknesses, learned from your inferiors, and found you wanting. Surrender now, and we will allow your people to serve in our labor forces. Continue to resist, and we will demonstrate what true warfare looks like. Zara's mental signature blazed with controlled fury, but her voice remained steady. Supreme Commander Krell, your forces have committed acts of war against sovereign Zephyrian territory. Withdraw immediately, or face the consequences. Krell's laugh was like grinding gears. Consequences? We have seen your military doctrine, studied your tactics, observed your responses. You fight with honor, with rules, with predictable patterns that we have learned to exploit. But more than that, we have learned new ways of war from the primitive humans you so foolishly elevated. The Andromedan commander's image shifted, showing tactical displays of recent attacks. Asymmetric warfare, psychological operations, total war concepts that target civilian infrastructure and morale rather than military assets. Your human allies have taught us well. Marcus felt every eye in the command center turned toward him, the weight of accusation and suspicion pressed down like a physical force. Had his own species' military philosophy been turned against the empire he now called home? There's only one way to end this quickly and preserve what remains of your civilization, Krell continued. Deliver the human Marcus Chun to us. He has contaminated your empire with inferior thinking and made you vulnerable to our new strategies. Remove the infection, and we will consider terms for your surrender. The communication ended, leaving the command center in tense silence. Marcus could feel the conflict in the room's atmosphere as officers and nobles struggled between duty to their queen and the horrible logic of Krell's offer. It was Admiral Vexton who spoke first. Your Majesty, perhaps we should consider— No. Zara's mental voice cut through the room like a blade. I will not negotiate with terrorists, and I will not sacrifice my husband to appease an enemy. General Thakmore's cybernetic systems hummed with uncertainty. But, Majesty, if the humans' tactical knowledge has been used against us, then we'll use it better, Marcus interrupted, stepping forward. The quiet researcher was completely gone now, replaced by someone who radiated the same deadly confidence that had made humans the apex predators on their homeworld. Krell thinks he understands human warfare because he studied our history and copied our tactics, Marcus said, his voice carrying authority that surprised even himself. But he's made the same mistake that every enemy of humanity has made throughout history. He's confused the tool with the toolmaker. Marcus activated his personal interface, and suddenly, every display in the command center showed a three-dimensional map of Andromedan fleet positions. But these weren't the scattered, random deployments that their hit-and-run tactic suggested. Instead, the display revealed a carefully orchestrated pattern with Andromedan forces positioned for a massive coordinated assault on the Zephyrian homeworld. The raids were never about conquest or terror, Marcus explained. They were about positioning. Every attack, every probe, every seemingly random strike has been pushing our forces into specific defensive configurations while concealing their real fleet movements. Science Minister Velnara, monitoring from the bridge of her research vessel, projected her excitement across the tactical network. How did you determine their true positions? Our sensors show only the raiding forces. Marcus's smile was sharp and predatory, because while they were learning human tactics, I was learning Andromedan psychology. They're warriors, but they're also perfectionist engineers. They can't help but optimize their approaches, even when trying to appear random. Once I mapped the pattern of their chaos, their real strategy became obvious. He manipulated the display, showing projected attack vectors that would strike at the heart of Zephyrian space within days. But here's what Krell doesn't understand about humans. We don't just adapt to threats. We turn threats into opportunities. The display shifted again, showing the defensive network that Marcus had been constructing over the past months. But it wasn't just defensive. Hidden within the infrastructure were offensive capabilities that would turn the Andromedans' own tactics against them. Every raid they've conducted has provided me with detailed intelligence on their ship configurations, their command protocols, their technological signatures, Marcus continued. They think they've been studying us, but we've been studying them right back. Queen Zara felt a fierce pride welling up in her chest. Her husband wasn't just reacting to the crisis. He had been anticipating it, preparing for it, laying groundwork for victory while everyone else worried about survival. "What do you need?" she asked simply. Marcus looked around the command center, meeting the eyes of officers who had dismissed him as a primitive curiosity just hours earlier. 12 hours, and authorization to implement Protocol Omega. Admiral Vexton's mental signature carried confusion. Protocol Omega? I'm not familiar with that designation. It's not in the Zephyrian military database, Marcus replied. It's pure human doctrine, something we developed for dealing with opponents who thought they had learned to fight like us. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of millennia of human survival against impossible odds. We call it teaching the teacher. Outside the command ship's viewports, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, oblivious to the cosmic chess game being played out among them. But in the depths of space, instruments that no Andromedan knew existed began to activate, powered by hybrid technology that combined Zephyrian advancement with human ingenuity. The real war was about to begin. Protocol Omega began at dawn on the Zephyrian homeworld, though dawn was a human concept that had no real meaning in the endless void of space. Marcus had insisted on the timing, explaining that psychological warfare began with understanding how different species conceptualize time and hope. The Andromedan fleet emerged from hyperspace exactly where Marcus had predicted, their massive dreadnoughts and escort vessels forming the characteristic geometric patterns that their crystalline minds found aesthetically pleasing. Supreme Commander Krell's flagship, a behemoth called the Infinite Fractal, led the formation with its weapons systems already charging for what should have been a devastating opening salvo. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Queen Zara watched the tactical displays with the calm focus of a predator evaluating its prey. Around her, the combined fleets of the Zephyrian Empire held position in what appeared to be a desperate defensive formation. To Andromedan sensors, it would look like exactly the kind of rigid, predictable response their studies of Zephyrian doctrine had led them to expect. Incoming transmission from the Andromedan flagship reported communications officer Thelnax, her mental voice carrying traces of nervousness despite her professional training. "Put him through," Zara commanded. Supreme Commander Krell's image filled the main view screen, his crystalline features reflecting satisfaction at what he perceived as Zephyrian tactical inflexibility. "Queen Zarathal, I see you have chosen to meet us in open battle rather than surrender your primitive pet. So be it. Your forces are outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a formation that my tactical analysts predict will collapse within minutes of engagement." "Krell," Zara replied, her four arms moving in a gesture of formal challenge that the Andromedans would recognize and respect. "You speak of primitives and pets, but you seem to have forgotten something important about both humans and Zephyrians." "And what is that?" Krell's voice carried the grinding confidence of silicon certainty. Marcus stepped into view of the communication array, his human form dwarfed by Zara's regal presence, but radiating an authority that made Krell's crystalline features shift into patterns of unease. "You forgot that we're both species that survive by being apex predators," Marcus said calmly. "And The thing about apex predators, Krell, is that we don't just adapt to our environment. We reshape it to suit our needs. Without warning, Marcus activated a control that had been hidden within the bridge's human-Zephyrian hybrid systems. Throughout space, seemingly empty regions suddenly erupted with activity as cloaked installations came online. Stealth satellites that had been disguised as space debris began transmitting targeting data. Mining platforms that appeared to be abandoned revealed themselves as heavily armed battle stations. But, most shocking of all, several asteroids throughout the system began to move with purpose, their rocky exteriors splitting apart to reveal massive weapon platforms that had been constructed inside hollow planetary bodies. "Impossible," Krell transmitted, his voice losing its confident, grinding tone. "Our sensors detected no such installations. Our intelligence indicated no such capabilities." "That's because you studied Zephyrian doctrine and human tactics," Marcus replied, "but you never bothered to learn about human engineering philosophy. We don't just build weapons, Krell. We build traps." The holographic displays around the Eternal Dominion's bridge now showed the true scope of the defenses Marcus had been constructing for months. Every asteroid, every piece of space debris, every abandoned station in the system had been converted into part of a massive defensive network. The Andromedans hadn't jumped into a battle. They had jumped into the galaxy's largest and most sophisticated ambush. "You see," Marcus continued, his voice taking on the tone of a professor explaining a particularly elegant solution to a complex problem, "humans learned something important during our evolution. The best weapons are the ones your enemy doesn't know exist until it's too late to matter." Admiral Vexstun's mental signature blazed with amazement as he coordinated the hidden fleet elements. "Sir, how did you manage to construct all this without detection?" "Simple," Marcus replied. "I used Zephyrian manufacturing capabilities, but I applied human project management principles. Instead of building obvious military installations, we built civilian infrastructure that could be rapidly converted when needed. Every mining station doubles as a weapons platform. Every communication relay includes offensive capabilities. Every trade depot can become a military stronghold." Supreme Commander Krell's image flickered as a ship's sensors tried to process the scope of the trap he had led his forces into. "This changes nothing. We still outnumber you. We still possess superior firepower." "Do you?" Zara asked, and for the first time since the communication began, she smiled. It was not an expression of warmth. Marcus activated another control, and the space around the Andromedan fleet suddenly filled with thousands of small objects that their sensors hadn't detected. They were too small to be ships, too numerous to be missiles, and moving in patterns that defied conventional tactical analysis. "What are those?" Krell demanded. "Humans call them killer bees," Marcus explained. "Tiny automated drones, each one smaller than your smallest fighter craft, each one carrying enough explosive power to cripple a capital ship's systems. We built them using principles we learned from Earth social insects, but with the manufacturing capabilities of a galactic civilization." The drone swarm began to move, and the Andromedans quickly discovered that their weapons systems, designed to engage large targets at long range, were nearly useless against thousands of tiny, highly maneuverable opponents. Worse, the drones seemed to learn from each defensive response, adapting their attack patterns in real time to exploit newly discovered vulnerabilities. "Your tactical analysis was correct about one thing," Marcus said as explosions began to bloom across the Andromedan formation. "Humans did teach you new ways of warfare. The problem is, we only taught you the basics." General Thakmore, coordinating ground-based defenses, projected his excitement across the tactical network. "Sir, the drones are not only attacking their ships. They're infiltrating their command networks, disrupting their communications, even interfering with their life support systems. Each drone carries a small EMP generator," Marcus explained, both for the benefit of his allies and to ensure Krell understood exactly how thoroughly he had been outmaneuvered. Not powerful enough to shut down a ship completely, but precise enough to target specific systems. Weapons, shields, sensors, navigation, communications. We can disable them selectively, turning your mighty war fleet into a collection of floating scrap metal. The Infinite Fractal shuddered as drone swarms penetrated its defenses, and Krell's image began to distort as his ship systems came under attack. "This is treachery," This violates every principle of honorable warfare. No, Zara said, her mental voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. This is evolution. You studied our past, Krell, but you failed to anticipate our future. You learned to fight like yesterday's humans, but my husband represents tomorrow's humanity. Around them, the battle, if it could even be called that, continued to unfold with mechanical precision. The hidden installations systematically dismantled Andromedan capital ships, while the drone swarms neutralized their smaller craft. It wasn't the glorious clash of titans that traditional space warfare represented. It was an execution disguised as a tactical engagement. You wanted to learn about human warfare? Marcus asked as Krell's image continued to degrade. Here's your final lesson. Humans don't fight fair. We fight to win. And when we have the resources of an advanced civilization at our disposal, winning doesn't just mean defeating our enemies. It means making sure they never want to fight us again. The communication from the Infinite Fractal cut off entirely as the flagship's command systems finally succumbed to the relentless assault of the drone swarms. Around the system, other Andromedan vessels began transmitting surrender requests as their crews realized the hopelessness of their situation. But Marcus wasn't finished yet. Protocol Omega had been designed not just to defeat the Andromedans, but to send a message that would resonate throughout the galaxy. As the last Andromedan weapons fell silent, he activated the final phase of his plan. Throughout the system, hidden transmitters began broadcasting the complete tactical engagement to every major civilization in the local galactic region. The entire battle, from the revelation of the hidden defenses to the systematic dismantling of the Andromedan fleet, was being transmitted in real time to potential allies and enemies alike. Let them all see, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying across the bridge's communication systems. Let every species in the galaxy understand what happens when they mistake human patience for human weakness. Queen Zara looked at her husband with a mixture of love, pride, and just a touch of fear. She had married a modest man who gave her flowers and spoke softly of hope. But she had awakened something far more dangerous, a human who had been given the tools to reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The war was over, but Marcus Chen's true work was just beginning. 3 months after the Andromedan surrender, the Intergalactic Council convened an emergency session on Nexus Prime. Representatives from 47 different species filled the Great Assembly Hall, their various forms creating a symphony of color, sound, and telepathic energy that would have been overwhelming to most beings. But Marcus Chun sat quietly in the human delegation section, wearing the same simple clothing he favored in his laboratory, apparently unbothered by the cosmic significance of the gathering. The emergency session had been called to address what the galactic community was calling the human question. In the space of a single engagement, humanity had gone from being considered a minor curiosity to representing what many saw as an existential threat to the established order of galactic civilization. Chancellor Vorth of the Regellian Federation called the session to order with a series of harmonic tones that translated across all species communication methods. Distinguished representatives, we gather today to address the implications of recent events in the Zephyrian sector. The technological capabilities demonstrated during what is now being called the Battle of New Horizons have raised fundamental questions about the balance of power in our region of space. Around the assembly, various species representatives displayed their concern in ways appropriate to their biology. The crystalline Altarians shifted colors rapidly through spectrums of anxiety and fear. The gaseous Nebulan's plasma forms swirled with agitated patterns. Even the machine intelligences of the synthetic collective emitted error codes that roughly translated as distress. Queen Zara rose from her place in the Zephyrian delegation, her 4 arms moving in gestures of formal address. Honored Chancellor, the Zephyrian Empire acted purely in self-defense against an unprovoked attack by Andromedan forces. The methods used were necessary to preserve our sovereignty and protect our citizens. Methods that involved technology no one else knew existed, interjected Ambassador Kelks of the Thraxian hegemony, his reptilian features showing barely controlled aggression. Methods that suggest capabilities far beyond what any single species should possess. Methods that could be turned against any of us at any time. Marcus felt the weight of dozens of gazes upon him, some curious, some fearful, some calculating. He had expected this moment. In fact, he had been preparing for it since the day he first set foot on a non-human world. "If I may address the council," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the vast chamber despite its quiet tone. Chancellor Vortha's harmonic response indicated permission, though several representatives transmitted objections that were overruled by parliamentary procedure. Marcus stood, and the simple act seemed to command attention from beings who ruled star systems. "Honored representatives, I understand your concerns. The demonstration of new technological capabilities always creates uncertainty, especially when those capabilities seem to come from an unexpected source. But I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about what actually happened in the recent conflict." He gestured, and holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber, showing technical schematics that had been declassified for this presentation. The technologies used against the Andromedans weren't purely human innovations. They were hybrid systems that combined human engineering principles with the advanced manufacturing capabilities and scientific knowledge of the Zephyrian Empire. The displays shifted to show the construction process for the drone swarms, revealing how human concepts of distributed intelligence had been merged with Zephyrian nanotechnology to create something neither species could have achieved alone. What you witnessed wasn't one species dominating another through superior technology, Marcus continued. It was an example of what becomes possible when different species work together instead of viewing each other as threats or resources to be exploited. Representative Yithvar of the Aquatic Collective projected skepticism through the chamber's telepathic network. Yet humans seem to be directing this cooperation entirely. How can we be certain that this partnership is truly equal? Before Marcus could respond, Queen Zara rose again. "If I may answer that question." She paused, then continued in a tone that carried both regal authority and personal conviction. 3 years ago, I married Marcus Chun because I saw in him qualities that I believed would make our empire stronger. I have not been disappointed." She gestured toward the tactical displays. "But the innovations you've seen are not the product of one brilliant human mind imposing its will on advanced alien technology. They are the result of genuine collaboration between equals." Marcus brought human perspectives on problem-solving and adaptation. "Our scientists contributed knowledge accumulated over centuries of research. Our engineers provided manufacturing capabilities that made human concepts possible on a galactic scale." Science Minister Velnara, attending as part of the Zephyrian delegation, activated her own holographic displays. "If I may demonstrate the truth of Her Majesty's words." The new displays showed the design process for the defensive network, revealing how every major innovation had emerged from collaborative sessions between human and Zephyrian researchers. Marcus's contributions were clearly significant, but they built upon and enhanced existing Zephyrian capabilities rather than replacing them. The quantum entanglement principles used in the EMP devices came from human theoretical physics, Velnara explained, but the crystalline matrices that made them practical were based on centuries of Zephyrian material science. The drone swarm intelligence was inspired by human studies of social insects, but the manufacturing techniques that made millions of units possible came from our automated production facilities. Marcus nodded appreciatively at Velnara's presentation. "What Minister Velnara is showing you is the real revolution here. Not human domination, but human integration. For the first time in galactic history, a species has been fully integrated into an advanced civilization not as subjects or servants, but as true partners." Ambassador Kelx's reptilian features showed confusion. "But the tactical capabilities you demonstrated could be replicated by any species with sufficient resources. You have essentially weaponized the concept of cooperation itself." "Exactly," Marcus said, and his smile carried none of the warmth his wife was accustomed to. This was the expression of a predator who had successfully stalked its prey. Every species in this chamber has the potential to achieve similar results. All you need is the willingness to truly collaborate with species you currently view as inferior. The implications of his statement rippled through the assembly like a shockwave. Representatives began to understand that Marcus hadn't just defeated the Andromedans. He had demonstrated a pathway for any species to dramatically enhance their capabilities through genuine cooperation with others. Chancellor Vortha's harmonic tones carried undertones of uncertainty. Are you suggesting that the solution to the perceived threat is for all species to form similar partnerships? I'm suggesting that there never was a threat to begin with, Marcus replied. The technologies we used are defensive in nature. The tactics we employed were reactive, not aggressive. The message we sent to the galaxy wasn't fear us, but rather work with us. He gestured toward the various alien representatives. Each species here has unique capabilities, unique perspectives, unique solutions to problems that other species might never even recognize. The Altarians' crystalline biology gives them insights into quantum mechanics that carbon-based life can barely comprehend. The Nebulan's plasma forms allow them to manipulate energy in ways that solid matter beings find impossible. The synthetic collective processes information at speeds that biological intelligence can't match. The chamber fell silent as representatives began to process the implications of Marcus's words. What if, instead of viewing these differences as potential threats or exploitation opportunities, Marcus continued, we viewed them as potential partnerships? What if the real question isn't how to contain human influence, but how to expand the model of cooperation that created it? Queen Zara felt a surge of pride as she watched her husband transform a tribunal into a negotiation, a crisis into an opportunity. This was the man she had seen in that quiet moment with a simple flower, the one who looked for hope in dark places and found ways to nurture it into something beautiful. Representative Yithvar's telepathic projection carried tentative curiosity. What would such cooperation look like in practical terms? Marcus's smile became genuine for the first time during the session. It would look like the aquatic collective's mastery of fluid dynamics being combined with Thraxian metallurgy to create new forms of space travel. It would look like Rigelian harmonic manipulation being merged with synthetic collective processing power to develop new forms of communication. It would look like every species' greatest strengths being shared instead of hoarded. He paused, letting his words resonate through the chamber. It would look like a galaxy where species compete to be the best partners rather than the most dominant powers. Chancellor Vortha's harmonic response carried cautious optimism. This is a radical departure from established galactic relations. How would such partnerships be regulated? How would conflicts be resolved? The same way my marriage works, Marcus said, glancing at Zara with an expression that carried 3 years of shared challenges and mutual growth. Through communication, compromise, and the understanding that both partners are stronger together than either could be alone. As the session continued into its second day, what had begun as an emergency response to a perceived threat gradually transformed into the foundation for a new approach to galactic civilization. Not all species would embrace the partnership model immediately, and some might never accept it at all. But the seeds of change had been planted. Marcus Chun had come to the galaxy as the representative of a primitive species seeking their place among the stars. He was leaving as the architect of a new form of interstellar relations that would reshape the balance of power for generations to come. And in his laboratory aboard the Eternal Dominion, the sunflower Zara had first given him continued to turn toward the light, its genetically modified structure now incorporating beneficial adaptations from 7 different worlds. It had become something new, something better than its original form, while still remaining fundamentally a sunflower. It was, Marcus thought as he tended to it each morning, a perfect metaphor for what the galaxy was becoming.